overview. We sometimes, do a quick lightning speed Power BI overview before we get started, but if it's not needed, then we can bypass that. So does anybody speak now or forever hold your peace if you want to hear a Power BI overview? Otherwise, we can get started with the feature presentation. All right, don't be shy. This is meant to be, we want to hear from everybody that's on the call. So definitely, if you have any questions or you just have a use case throughout, just let us know, and we're happy to talk to it. But with that being said, so we're probably just going to start off with the feature presentation today, and we're going to be talking about Power BI adoption. It's an exciting opportunity, Power BI, and not enough people, put the consideration that's required to really push it out to their organization. So we wanted to take a step back from, all the technology and all that cool stuff to, once again, just take a step back and take a look at what it means to truly adopt a product like Power BI. We then have a presentation by Bill Blaise on the call. He's going to be going through the Tabular Editor and some integration with Power BI. And then we'll move on to the monthly new feature summary. Power BI is getting updates every single month. For the most part, I think they missed one this year because of COVID in June. But we'll be going over August and September, those monthly updates. And then, of course, at the very end, if you guys have any ideas, anything you want to talk about, business cases, problems you may have, we want to talk to you guys and use this group as an opportunity to ask questions to everybody that has the same goal, which is just to learn more about Power BI. So with that being said, I want to do a few introductions. Just your name, company or industry, and then a recent BI challenge of yours. So my name is Casey Philcox. I'm a lead consultant with Talon. My recent BI challenge is definitely Power BI adoption, which has made me, spur this presentation. A lot of organizations are kind of asking for the same thing nowadays, and around Power BI, and it's, how do I govern a self-service business intelligence tool? So it's putting those processes in place and assignment of roles and responsibilities, all that stuff kind of wraps into Power BI adoption. So what I've learned from my experience and my challenge, I hope to share with all of you today. Anybody else want to give some intros?
Yeah, I'll go. So my name's James Airy. I'm also lead consultant with Talon on their data analytics practice. As for recent BI challenge I've had, is connecting Power BI to the database side of an SAS instance so that I could make measures on top of their calculations, which was kind of funky. I ran some issues like trying to get the numbers to line up properly, but it was definitely an interesting experience to be able to see, like, you can treat an SAS instance like just like another data set, and sort of get some of that data directly and maybe do some work if you don't have permission, if you don't have the permission to edit the data set, the SAS instance directly.
Nice, thanks, James.
I could go. This is Jared Brown, VP of Data and Analytics at Talon, and let's see. Recent challenge is a lot of demand to kind of push the bounds of what's perceived to be possible with Power BI. So whether it's access to larger data sets, multilingual support, advanced auditing, all these are topics that are coming up as people want to push the solutions further. So we definitely have quite a few folks who've been heads down trying to achieve all those outside of what Power BI supports natively, and it's kind of been a great experience because you start to see some of those changes incorporated into the product. So, and out of this user group, really just kind of making people aware of Power BI, its capabilities, and peripheral products, and helping kind of drive kind of excitement about the platform and the community. So
I'll go. Bill Blaze. I'm a senior architect at the data analytics practice. And also, by the way, hello from Dallas. I'm probably the farthest person away here. I'm originally from the Hartford area, but moved down here to Texas 4 or 5 years ago. So greetings from Texas. And I'll be giving a little bit of a couple tricks here for using Tabular Editor later. But really, one of my more recent challenges has been, and a couple of folks actually from Talon have been working with me on this, dealing with a date table in Power BI that is completely disconnected from all other tables, and being able to create measures that perform pretty well even when there's no relationship between these tables. That's quite a fun thing to do. I don't know if you've ever dealt with disconnected dates or disconnected any tables, Power BI, and having to use measures to do it all, but it is not for the weary or the meek. And then also doing a lot, and I think others on the call too, we've been doing a lot lately with Databricks in Azure. And for those of you who may, be kind of getting into some of the more, modern ways of doing BI and using things like Databricks, that can be a challenge too, just kind of getting your mindset out of data warehousing as traditional, and even what we do in Power BI. Sometimes we have to kind of take a step back when we get back into the underlying data sets and what we do, a little bit differently. So a couple of my challenges.
Hey everyone, I'll hop in. My name's Graham Atkinson. I'm a senior consultant with Talon and the data and analytics practice. I'd say my most recent challenge is trying to grow a beard that's not patchy. But in terms of BI, my most recent challenges, having worked exclusively with Power BI in the past 10 months, there's been a couple, but I'd say the most necessary thing to discuss with all of the people that I'm introducing Power BI to at the company I'm working with is the necessity for clean data or data preparation. I can't tell you how much easier it is to build a report off of data that people have thought about and structured in a way that's friendly to consumption, rather than taking an unclean data set and having to implement all these measures in Power BI to kind of fix the data and get it prepped. So really, I think just the most important thing that I can say about building a Power BI report is think about the data first.
I was going to say I can hop in next. So my name's Noah Kale. I'm a business development manager over at Talon. So definitely don't use Power BI as much as everyone on this call. But I'd say my biggest challenge is always trying to stay up to speed with the topics that our customers care most about around Power BI, at least at a high level. And then I'd say what I want to get out of this group is kind of, that knowledge, just like getting a little bit more insight as to, around Power BI adoption this session, and then, following sessions, those topics.
Yeah, hi, my name is David Villegas. I work at Health New England in Springfield. I would say a recent challenge that I've had is using the configuring workspaces in Power BI Service and learning how the pipelines are set up, and also using Azure AD groups to do some of the security and access controls. And then what do I want to get out of this user group? Just learning what some of the new features are and what some of the old features are that I don't know about.
David, are you guys using the premium deployment pipeline feature then?
Yeah, we are.
Excellent. Awesome.
Yep.
Very nice. Anybody else want a brief intro? All right. Well, definitely don't be shy if you want to, speak up later on. Definitely, please do so. I encourage it. This is meant to be, interactive, and if you have a question, just feel free to, just chime in at any time. So, all right. So a few business-related items to take care of. User group business items. Our meeting frequency is every other month. For leadership roles, we're still looking for a VP of programming. What this would entail is just aiding in the efforts of kind of putting together some of these presentations, getting the technology at the forefront of the user group, and just becoming a member of the user group, really. For other volunteer roles, content producers, if you don't want to, take an official role in the user group, you just want to present something. Today I have a presentation for you. We have Bill on the call. He's going to do Tabular Editor, and Graham is going to show some of the new feature summary items. But if you have a 2-minute demo, that's worth showing. So any content is greatly appreciated, and I'm sure if it's something, even a problem that you might have to showcase on the call, we're looking for that kind of that content. So if you have anything like that, just reach out to myself. This Teams chat is now open. You can throw a message if you get some thought the next day. Just let us know. Along with that, we have sponsorship. If your organization wants to sponsor one of these user groups, you're more than welcome to do so. We'll help facilitate that and get a presentation on the books for your organization to sponsor. So a lot of you may be familiar already. We have the meetup group for each of our PUG meetings. But we also have, more importantly, the Power BI user group site. So this is the preferred method to kind of stay in touch, see all the latest and greatest news and scheduling from Power BI new features to just the scheduling of the next event. So definitely, if you're not already on the user group itself at pbiusergroup.com, definitely sign up there. Along with that, I will mention, there's discussion posts. So if you ever have a problem that you want to post, not everybody on this, or there are other people not on this call that can keep up to date on this discussion forum and can help answer questions you may have. All right. So without further ado, I'll be happy to jump into our presentation. Sorry. Because we're actually going to take a step back from a lot of the technical pieces of Power BI, and we're going to go back to basics of implementing a processes and introducing a new product into your organization. And with that, we're going to talk about Power BI adoption. Now, I'll just start with my own scenario. I'd say this is a couple years back now, but I was put on my very first Power BI project, and I was not happy with how it went. I remember, I was still relatively new to Power BI at that point. I was familiar with the general architecture, but basically what it came down to was they wanted reports, business critical reports. I created them in Power BI Desktop, and they probably sat on a folder somewhere in Power BI Desktop, and maybe a year later they were resurfaced. They finally got published to the service, and no one knew they existed. And overall, I made these great reports, and that was it. They just sat there, and it's discouraging. And the purpose of this presentation, I've learned a lot since then, and I want to share how you could prevent this scenario from happening to you. There's been a lot of advancements in Power BI. With that being said, so a lot of this, is more public knowledge as well. If you search for documentation on this kind of stuff, it's more abundant. But I just wanted to share that because I recognize from experience how important this topic actually is. So why care about Power BI adoption? So Power BI adoption is a very exciting opportunity. A lot of people have already been sold on, looking at these visualizations. They're like, oh, wow, that looks great. It's easy. I could drag and drop these fields and create visuals and reports within a day. So a lot of people are already sold, but the challenge is not the report creation or the, selling your organization. It's the challenge is adoption and self-service business intelligence. So why care about Power BI adoption is you want to be able to drive a data culture within your organization. You want to empower your users to consume data quickly, and you also want to change their mindset and behavior to act on data as they need it. There's nothing more productive than rather than sending out an email to IT when you need a report, than to just go to app.powerbi.com and create what you need as you need it. Another reason to care about Power BI adoption is to have, an agile BI mindset. So Power BI now challenges that traditional waterfall method where it took months or years to create Power BI solutions. With proper planning, Power BI can help you cut down that time to, like I mentioned, days or even hours to create a report. And then finally, for some of you IT managers out there, the ability to consolidate your business intelligence tools is a prospect in itself. I guarantee there's some scenarios around organizations where someone says, "Hey, I need help with this platform," and the IT member says, "I don't even know what that platform is," right? And I'm IT, so I got to support it. So the idea of consolidation of tools, resonates with this group, and Power BI makes this possible. So back to the original use case of my story on my project, I could directly relate to this visual. Typically with Power BI, deployment and activation of Power BI desktop, installing that on your machine, and activating your Power BI Pro licenses with Office 365. That's usually achieved. It's very easily achieved too. You're just purchasing a service and downloading a piece of software on your desktop. This is usually achieved, but you'll notice in this visual, the value is extremely low. The value of Power BI is with adoption and proficiency. So the ability, again, for people to use the solution on a regular basis and for people to change their behaviors and leverage the full solution. So think of this visual as 3 separate segments: enablement, support, and then the final stage where you're continuously driving value. So enablement is kind of the first third of this graph. That's where you teach the business, you activate their licenses, and you deliver some solutions for them. So typically this is around like 80% IT and then 20% business. Now in the middle third here, we have support. So this is where you help the users create the solutions and you put in place the framework and the infrastructure and just provide them the guidance to do some things on their own. So that's where we're at the activation and some adoption there. And then finally, the final third, the final stage, is business users support each other. So they are actively in the solution, they're proficient with the solution, they have ongoing trainings with Power BI, and they're able to proficiently use Power BI. So that is the goal and what Power BI adoption kind of looks to get that return on investment out of. Oops. So with that, let's talk about the methodology that works for me personally, and I think other organizations as well. And with that, there's kind of 3 different parts of the methodology: envisioning, onboarding, and then driving value. So hopefully the goal is during this meeting, you could kind of take some ideas within this particular framework and potentially apply within your organization to push Power BI to that next level, to work on self-service business intelligence and truly get your organization excited and using the product. So in the envisioning phase, we ultimately just want to prove value. So this is the easiest part. There's one hard part, I guess, of the envisioning, and that's educating an executive sponsor. In order for Power BI to succeed, I see this as one of the most important parts of Power BI adoption. It's identifying the person in your organization that is able to guide you forward and make the decisions on, yes, we want self-service business intelligence. Power BI is the tool to achieve this, and the executive sponsor is going to play a pivotal role in the framework of Power BI adoption. So once they have been identified, you then want to identify your Power BI champions. So these are usually people like us on the call, actually, who are passionate about Power BI. They're going to Power BI user groups, they're attending trainings, and you want to involve these people in your organization early to help understand the challenges and learn how Power BI can help solve those challenges. You then want to train a pilot team. This can be some individuals from your Power BI champions and some of your business intelligence developers who are ultimately going to curate a pilot. And then finally, you're going to prove value of Power BI. You're going to get that executive sponsor on board. You could potentially address product gaps throughout the way. I highly recommend if your organization has this particular gap that they see Power BI not fulfilling, then what you can do is you could go to the community board and you could post an idea that can be voted on. But this is the opportunity to get to the bottom of those gaps before they come up in a production use case. So again, the envisioning is ultimately identifying these people and then proving the value of Power BI. So just some key learnings from my own experience on that envisioning phase. My recommendation is do what's feasible and impactful. Don't develop the end-to-end solution right away. Pick something like Excel and get people working with the product. Show them the visuals right off the bat, as I'm sure probably a lot of you have already done. In terms of permission and approvals, request business users to share data with you, just pretty straightforward stuff. Same with non-sensitive data. You want to pick data that they could quickly share, something that's not sensitive that you could get on a Power BI report and get going straight away. Another thing that I found very useful was business shadowing. So this is like peer review. Let's say that you have, a developer that, maybe they're new to Power BI. Have them sit by your side, develop the solution, and show them that, get them on board with Power BI. It's not something that I guarantee they're going to say, I don't like this. I don't want to be a part of this. It'll get them excited, and allowing them to do the shadowing process with you is usually pretty helpful in implementing and getting more people on board when identifying those champions, if you will. All right, next on our methodology list is onboarding. So here's where we actually implement a project and begin that training. Training is a very important portion of this methodology. So what you're going to do is you're going to select a project. Remember, still kind of the same vein as our envisioning. Pick something that's the lowest effort but large value. So potentially something that has been implemented already. Graham on the call mentioned that how important data quality is. Maybe you have an EDW already in place. There's not a lot of upfront work that needs to be done. All the column mappings, all the data dictionaries are all in place. Start with that. Don't start with some SAP data that's crazy busy and really hard to access. Start with something simple. Then you could start to roll out some adoption workshops. Now these are important as they typically shadow the project that you're working on, and they allow people to get their hands on early to the report. So you can begin getting feedback from them, and you can explain the implementation, you can explain the rollout, and you can explain the support process that will be with this project as well. Kind of what I mentioned before, if there's any data quality issues, you could bring those up at this point in time. And then finally, the project is implemented. So at this point, there's documentation. You've finalized those data dictionaries and business column mappings. You've maybe created some videos to help support the use case. This is ultimately the journey to self-service intelligence. This is the first, stepping stone in rolling this out across the whole organization. So selecting this pilot project and training through adoption workshops is crucial to our success. And then finally, the driving value. This is, maintaining that proficiency in Power BI. And one of the most important things to do here is creating that center of excellence. So in this case, a center of excellence can be a lot of things. It can be those Power BI champions that, stay on top of the monthly updates, and they participate in the trainings. They know how to use Power BI, and they're active in the community. And they what also helps here is maybe they're putting together training curriculums for everyone to stay on top of what they need to stay on top of. Another huge one is internal marketing. So people need to know about Power BI. You're doing all this work for self-service business intelligence. You no longer want to see the email, like I mentioned, going to IT saying, where is this data? You need to do something, and the Center of Excellence can help curate this to let people know that their data is available to them. Again, end user training. You need to have a plan on it, I'll say that, and it needs to be available. So whether it be, you can't access a self-service data model until you watch this video. You need to pass this training before you can, begin creating reports in this workspace. A bunch of training needs to be, created so they can successfully use the platform. And all this, kind of comes into the internal community. Power BI, they have a bunch of steps forward in integration with Teams and email to allow people to answer questions, as well as the internal community as in us, again, the user group, and just leveraging resources like that to continue your growth in Power BI. So yeah, some key learnings that I found from the drive value stage. You want to involve IT early, as well as security teams early. You want to get their input to understand how users in the actual in your business will actually interact with Power BI. You want to leverage existing relationships. Again, I keep saying this: leverage the PUG. Like, come to this user group and ask us of what we know and what we've experienced. It will help you get to the place you want to be. Propose options and recommend. You are the expert. You can be that leader. Like, we know self-service business intelligence is a great way forward for our data and analytics space. So you are the expert. You can recommend this adoption framework. And environment and culture. Just make sure that you make decisions based on what will get the most buy-in. So that goes down to selecting the project that will be most impactful, then understanding your organization to know what they want and how they want it. So I'll quickly check the chat, see if there's any questions. All right. So another very important aspect of Power BI adoption is identifying the key roles. There's more than meets the eye to Power BI, or it's like an onion. When you peel the layers off, there's a lot to understand. Now, the slide that's showing now may look like a lot. There's a lot of roles, a lot of responsibilities, a lot of processes, but they're not, full-time jobs. They're just something that you need to understand that needs to be done, and the responsibilities need to be assigned. So whether you're part of the business technology team and you're you're building the reports, you're training end users, you may be a Power BI developer. Or maybe you're a data architect and you're more on the IT side of things, where you're getting the business requirements, you're building the self-service model, and you're doing that design work. You may have multiple hats in this case, but it is very important to create the documentation to actually assign the roles within your organization. Again, I mentioned educating the executive sponsor is probably the most important part. I think this is probably the second, just understanding that there are a bunch of roles and responsibilities in a successful Power BI deployment, and actually cataloging these assignments is crucial to the success. And again, I mentioned that center of excellence. This is something that I created for Talon, actually. And what it is it's our area, it's our hub, it's embedded in Microsoft Teams, and it just is our curated set of training materials. So what we can do is within this data analytics team we have, our center of excellence, people can rely on this team to see what the latest and greatest is in Power BI. These are just, it's kind of like a Netflix where they can go and they could select their training. It's just our way of exposing that content and keeping everybody up to date on the materials. All right. So next on the list, we have our methodology in place. The question that's probably next on everyone's mind is how do you govern this? How do you put those guardrails up so we can achieve the successful rollout of a project? So if you've ever been a part of a self-service business intelligence solution other than Power BI, hopefully, or maybe it is Power BI, I mean, you've probably seen the uncontrolled proliferation of BI apps, and your solutions probably look something like this, where you have tons of visualization tools and a whole bunch of tools that it's just uncontrollable. As simple as that. So that is why governance is needed. You want to be able to plan accordingly and document the processes. I've been continuing to say to make your rollout successful. And to do that, to plan for that success, during the time period of your Power BI rollout, you obviously want to hopefully prevent the uncontrolled further proliferation of BI apps, but you want to implement the process. You want to create that documentation, identify the roles, meet with your security team, meet with your all of your teams to understand how they intend to use Power BI and implement the processes before you even begin creating your first report. Now, I know before I go on, a lot of you probably are, part of an organization that, you've already been publishing content and using Power BI, but so it's hard to, start from scratch. That it definitely is a luxury. But maybe you do, propose taking a step back to implement those processes. I heard the question of how to use deployment pipelines and when to create workspaces. Maybe you do take that step back and you say, hey, when do we create workspaces? Who creates the workspaces? Should an Active Directory group be responsible for that? And how do we initiate that request? So all that stuff, maybe it's time to take that step back and understand what to do. And then once you have those proper governance processes, then you can be rest assured that you'll be able to drive your decisions, reduce risks, and increase user adoption within your organization. So just to list out what you need to consider when creating a governance plan, I'll just rattle these off. Environment administration, again, the creation of workspaces, the access to those workspaces, who can control deployment pipelines, who's the Power BI service administrator. You then have the tenant settings, so what you can and cannot do in your Power BI tenant. Can you share reports anonymously to the web? Yes or no? And I'll tell you that one is usually a no, but tenant settings are important to go through and as a Power BI service admin and review all those. The roles and responsibilities, again, mapping each individual within your team to an appropriate role, managing the enterprise gateways, security standards, meet with that security team, as I mentioned, so there's not any red flags that you're raising, how you're going to share your content, environment and report consistency, and then finally the publication of your source data and business data models. So just to list off a few, if you have any questions on these are the things that essentially we need to document to how our organization is going to govern. I think these are just kind of the same deal. Important considerations, you want to mention that publish to web one, whether that's on or off, what custom visuals you're allowed to use in your organization. Pretty much what I mentioned on the other side, just some important ones to kind of immediately maybe just turn your attention to. We've seen scenarios where organizations have the publish to web feature on, and the Power BI service admin has no idea. So that's why that one's on here. Definitely a red flag to immediately check. So when you're implementing these governance plans, you need to balance the needs of IT and the business. Remember, you want to kind of dissolve that divide between IT and the business and allow them to bounce off one another. They're not going to be completely dependent on them, but each group will be able to achieve what they need to achieve without the dependence on the other. But you do have that balance. Every enterprise is unique. Every organization is unique. You're probably asking why I can't search for, Power BI adoption tools or Power BI rollout tools. And it's because everybody's processes are different. There's not any canned solution to what we're talking about here. The legwork and that adoption methodology needs to go forward because, each enterprise is unique. In doing so, determine the initial principles and goals, and then clarify ownership. Kind of been redundant there, but just making sure that's understood. All right, so moving into the models in which you want to base your plan off of, you can see here this pyramid of where you get the tightest controls to your lowest controls. So something like an EDW, where everything that goes in there it's secured, it's cleansed. That's where IT probably has the most, interaction and most to say. While you move down this pyramid, then, all the way down to personal reporting, that's where you have the least amount of controls. So in your governance model or in your governance delivery, you just want to consider, each level and what you want to, potentially allow within your organization. So I see there being 3 approaches or 3 deployment modes. I'm going to start from, I'll go left to right. So the first is business-led self-service BI. So this one's a bottom-up approach where the business, governs all the data sets and reports. They're the ones that have Power BI desktop. They're preparing the data. They're creating the data models, ultimately publishing that to the service and sharing. This puts a lot of control within the business users itself. I don't know. I don't want to bash this one, but I see this one very difficult to govern, and I see this kind of having some gaps when you get larger and larger organizations. But it is an option. You can have the business control a lot of the aspects of your rollout. I'm going to move all the way to the right to the top-down approach, where this is something where a lot of us may have been a part of before. This is where the IT department controls everything. So they support all elements of the solution. The business users are purely just there to execute the published reports and consume the reports. So this is very tight control, and this is that top-down approach. Now, where I see the most interest is the blended approach. So here, IT, they control the data and the semantic layer, and they allow that for self-service reporting, or they create that as like a shared data set or something of that nature to the business to create self-service reports. They create the workspaces, they create the promoted or certified data set and publish that to a workspace for self-service business intelligence. So this blended approach, you get kind of the opportunity for IT to have that control, but you also have the business able to make those decisions, and they feel empowered to make those decisions when they have the ideas. Again, I won't discourage any of these options, but I think most of us may be thinking the blended approach, if you're using something like Power BI, is kind of the most obvious choice when delivering Power BI. All right. Oh, we got someone from California. Welcome. All right. So sorry. Didn't realize I stopped sharing. But the next on our list is stages of a premium migration. So this conversation is probably not for everybody. Premium is kind of a luxury. It's an expensive resource, but a lot of some of you may be using it today. It seems like David, you are using it, so that's great. And I wanted to share my experiences with moving content to premium. I will point out that Microsoft actually had their Ignite conference last month, or I guess it was, yeah, officially last month. And they actually offered a new licensing scheme that is coming in the future for premium per user. So for those that are unfamiliar, Power BI Premium is a capacity-based licensing. So unlike Pro, where a specific user gets tied to a license, a premium capacity gets assigned to content. So you back content by premium capacity. So how do you determine if your content needs premium, and how do you make the decisions to actually move that content to premium? Premium is a dedicated capacity. That's hardware that your organization is paying for specifically to fulfill a requirement. So you obviously want to be wary of what you put in there, and you want to ensure that you're making the best decision to move it there as well, and not affecting other people within that that premium capacity, that dedicated capacity. So as I mentioned, the first thing you got to do is you need to identify the reports and data sets. And what I mean by that is, do your reports have requirements that demand premium? So Some premium features include, is the model larger than 1 gig? That's the compressed. Are paginated reports required? Do the reports need to be shared with external users? Will Power BI Desktop AI modeling be used? And I think this incremental refresh one is a little out of date. They can you can do this in Pro with Pro accounts now. Regardless, look at your reports, look at your data sets, understand if they have a requirement with anything you see on the screen. One thing I don't have on here that's probably important to some is increasing the data set refresh to 48 times a day instead of 8. So things like that. Do you have a report or data set that requires premium? So once you do, let's say you've purchased premium capacity. We'll start with the lowest available option, which is a P1 node. And at that point in time, you need to assign a capacity administrator. So usually this is someone specific to a team, specific to a department, because again, usually a department gets a premium node to work with. I know this is with some medium-sized organizations, this may be a little difficult. You want multiple departments to share the same node. This is the ideal case, and again, everyone's different. But bottom line is you want to assign a capacity admin. The capacity admin is going to have administrative control to assign workspaces to premium. So they're ultimately the ones that say yes or no to moving content to premium. Their responsibilities are not only that, but they also need to monitor. So as they're making the decision on whether my content does go to premium or not, they want to look at the existing workspaces and content in premium and decide is my premium capacity functioning properly? Am I getting the proper performance? Is the CPU high? Is the memory high? Are my dataset queries taking too long? They have access to something called the Capacity Metrics app, where they can see all of these statistics for their capacity. So ultimately, this is an important role when using Power BI Premium, because they're going to be looking at all these related things to determine if the finance team asks to be moved to premium, they're going to make that decision yes or no, or we need to potentially do some model tuning or buy another capacity, a bunch of decisions, and the capacity admin plays a part in that. So as a general best practice, David and Jared, I heard you guys were excited about the deployment pipelines, and I am as well. This is a great feature that you get with Premium. It's currently in preview, and my thought is, if you got Premium, you should use it. Even if you don't have Premium, I recommend creating dev, test, and production workspaces. But when moving something to Premium, I say move it into a deployment pipeline. And what the deployment pipeline allows you to do is it allows you to have these independent environments for dev, test, and production. You can set up parameters and data set connection rules to point to dev, test, and prod environments. And ultimately, this pipeline is managed by a separate administrator, potentially, than the people who actually develop the content. So there's two levels of access here where you can have someone with this automated process simply be responsible for deploying content from dev, test to production, and ultimately a Power BI app as well. So yeah, in this picture, if you've never seen this, if we have time at the end of the meeting, I could actually demo this if anybody's interested. But here you could see my dev and test, they're up to date. I got this green check mark, and my test and prod have differences, and you can actually click on this icon. And here it's a little fuzzy, but it says I added a sales analysis report as well as a data set, and I can just click this button and it will move that content to production, of course, after I tested it. So generally, as a best practice, I think if you have Premium, why not leverage the pipeline moving forward? So once the capacity admin is in place, the deployment pipeline has been created. I think these actually are a little out of order now that I think about it. But once the decision has been made, yes, your content needs Premium. Yes, our capacity has the compute power, has the memory available to accommodate your report. Then you can switch that on. if you have premium and you're a capacity admin, you can just with the flip of a switch, move that content from shared capacity to a dedicated capacity. And here's that capacity metrics app I was mentioning. So this is the dashboard, but generally, some things to look at within this app. There's a whole bunch of different reports and pages within each report on statistics and logs of your capacity as a whole. But from here, you can see the general health. So green, red values on CPU and memory. You can monitor query length. So if something is taking a really long time within your capacity, you can, as a capacity admin, go to the owner of that data set and say, hey, you're taking up CPU on my capacity. Can you go tune this query, right? And then you can also monitor report usage and sharing. So really getting into the nitty gritty, let's say you have a report that has you're leveraging premium to allow free licensed users access to the report. And maybe you could say, oh, we only have 2 people. Maybe we just give them a pro license and we're good to go. This other workspace has 100 external users. So you can make that swap by looking at the report usage. So here's a workflow that kind of takes all of those steps that I just mentioned and kind of assigns the roles that I created here. So we have 2 roles here. We have the workspace admin. This is typically the BI developer that's actually creating the content. And then you have that capacity admin, that specified user who monitors the capacity. So I found this to be pretty useful with some projects I've been on. So it starts with the workspace admin developing that content. And then eventually, if they have a premium requirement, from a process perspective, they would fill out like a form or something like that saying, all right, this workspace needs this feature. The data set sizes are this. The longest query time is this. They would ultimately hand that off to their capacity admin, and they would review the workspace content and make the decision to either enable premium or to not enable premium. Once that decision is made, let's just say the capacity admin gives it the thumbs up. The workspace administrator would then, enable the premium features. Premium is now on. They can start leveraging that feature set that we talked about at the very beginning. And then finally, it's just a monitoring at this point. We have a brand new workspace in premium capacity. The capacity admin is now responsible for checking to see if, the addition of that workspace against my hardware or the hardware has, negatively impacted or is running smoother than ever. So this is just a sample, and again, kind of alluding to how important creating those documented processes are. So, just something as simple as a form to submit to the capacity admin. I know it's not the flashy stuff that some of us on the call like to do, where we're Bill's creating the date dimensions with no relationships. But sometimes you need to take that step back and create these processes to ensure that Power BI, as well as Premium, is rolled out effectively. All right, so I'd love to take any questions if there are any. Otherwise, we will move on to the Tabular Editor demo.
Casey, I think this is actually really cool. There's one thing that you did mention that I don't know if you have an example of this, but the idea of having a training session for end users before they're given access to on-demand functionality. Now, there are a couple of complications that can arise around that. Like you can put everything into your Power BI apps where people have their limited access, but then when you expand to doing their self-service reports, do you have a general idea of like a preferred way to do that for end users? Like, do you give them direct access to the workspace? Do you give them access to like this or that data set and then they have a play workspace, or maybe and then if that still supports RLS, like potential RLS solutions?
Yeah, so it's definitely different. I think this is a workspace more the kind of topic question. It's definitely different for all the businesses. Typically, I like separating my corporate BI business critical reports into a single workspace that's just managed by IT. And then I have something like a self-service development workspace where maybe a department can go in there with a shared data set. They can create reports as needed, and it's not published to an app or something like that. And then you have a self-service production workspace that you are creating self-service content that is distributed through an app. So there's kind of those three types. And then the question of who's creating that workspace, that is kind of up to process. I would probably lean on an IT member to create that workspace and then train them according to those three paths. It's a real difficult question though, because again it changes per organization, but that's something that I've seen success in. Does that make sense, James?
Yeah. It's just something I've run into in the past before, where it's like, who do you give access where? And then I've seen situations where there's a workspace with 100 end user self-service reports, and it's like, well, this is a nightmare, and they're commingled with like corporate reports. So I mean, obviously the separation of the two workspace helps a lot with that, but you're saying then you just share the data set from one workspace so they can be like, okay, I can still work with the good source of data.
Exactly. Yeah, I just started using or really using shared data sets, and the ability of the shared data sets to really break down data silos is worthwhile to look at in those scenarios. Like the ability for a BI developer to maintain that data set elsewhere, but then allow it to be promoted and certified for all these teams within different workspaces to report off of is very powerful. So it could potentially, with proper workspace organization and thought and process, hopefully you can eliminate those 100 report workspaces.
That is the dream.
That is the dream. Hopefully this could help out a little bit, some of the conversations. All right. In that case, I will stop sharing and we're going to hand it off to Bill.
Actually, stay there for 1 second, Casey.
Oh, yep, definitely.
Just wanted you guys to all see there's a link there to download Tabular Editor. You can always, everyone knows how to Google these days as well. But what I'm going to do is actually talk a little bit about that tool. So you can download it there. And then actually I will share. We can also put that information into the chat if need be. All right, let me know if you can see my screen. Casey, I believe you're still unmuted. Can you see my screen?
See it. Yep.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, some of you are going to be very familiar with this. I would imagine most of you. This is the dashboard in a day final output. So I'm not going to get into the details of this particular data set, but I'm going to kind of use it as an example of using Tabular Editor. So if you have a more recent version of Power BI Desktop installed, you may have seen there's this external tools option here. And there's a couple that are listed already, DAX Studio and Tabular Editor. Both are really cool. But I'm going to kind of stick to the Tabular Editor here and just show you, really kind of scratch the surface of a couple of the things you can do, is just to give you a flavor for where the Tabular Editor, might come into play in any data set you're creating. So once I have Tabular Editor installed, and actually I don't know exactly what happens if I don't have it installed. It may just open up the link for me, but once I have it installed, I can then click here and start the Tabular Editor. So that's what I do. All right, and one thing you're going to see here, right, and they've been saying this for a long time, but even before Tabular Editor was sort of a sanctioned thing that Power BI, Microsoft has allowed to sort of be certified for use with Power BI data sets. even before that, people were using it for Tabular or using Tabular Editor for Power BI, and there are some features and things that it does that could potentially mess up your Power BI desktop file. So they're even still to this day saying this: experimental Power BI features is enabled. You can edit any object and property of this desktop model, but be aware that many types of changes are currently not supported. And you'll run into this, I guarantee you. If you're doing some of the basic stuff, it'll be okay. But I'll show you a couple of things that I've tried and been able to kind of stay away from in using it. But anyway, you'll get this little warning each time you start up. All right, and then to come back to here, just to kind of give you a use case. So what I love, one of the things I love about Power BI Desktop, right, is it won't let you get too far without checking that what you just did was correct, right? So if I come in here and I say, I have too many parentheses here in my DAX formula, it's not going to let me get too far. It's going to chug for a second, and then it's going to tell me that there was a problem, and it's not going to let me go beyond that. Yeah, of course, I can leave that error there and move on and leave the error, but it's not going to let me sort of get very far with a broken thing. But one of the things I really hate about Power BI Desktop is it doesn't let you get very far. So I'm sure you guys have experienced this with very large data sets, especially. You start adding measures and it takes forever. You make a change to one and you hit enter and you go get a cup of coffee and it's working on it, and then you wait and wait and wait. And so, this is a problem that I believe Tabular Editor can help a lot with, as long as the kinds of things that you're doing are sort of repeatable. So just to give you an example of that, say I've got this, I've added some measures here to my dyad data set, and really it's around creating something like this table here, right? So what I've done is I've said, all right, my sales for mix, I've got 4 different categories of products. And of course, I could just use the product category, right, as a way to group and drag it into a visual and then have my revenue show up. But let's just say, for sake of discussion, I wanted to actually have a measure that is basically a sum of my revenue for each of the categories. So this one is for mix, right? And this one is for rural and urban and youth. Okay, and let's imagine I had more than 4 of them. Let's say I had 100 different categories. Okay, and this happens a lot as well. Someday in the future, right, a new measure gets created. Now this one's pretty basic one, but go with me. Let's say a new measure gets created that is this sum of sales revenue, right? So really, in a good model, I would actually change this measure. I would come back to each of these measures and I would say, oh, don't recalculate sum of sales revenue, calculate the measure that is sales, which is this here, right? So if you look at sales, it's sum of sales revenue. So anytime I want to do a filtered sales, I should use that sales measure. Well, in order to do that, what am I going to have to do, right? I'm going to have to come in here and change every single one of these. I'm going to have to come to this guy and say, sales, and, maybe I get good at, I forgot the brackets, and maybe I get good at copy paste and all that. But either way, I still got to come to every single one of these measures. And again, imagine there's 100 of them, and change that formula, right? And I may miss one, or I may, there's all kinds of problems that could happen. So, and again, if my model's huge, it's going to take forever every time I change one of these for it to complete that work for me. So I'm actually going to come back here. So let me make sure I didn't save that. I did not save that. Okay, good. All right. So here's my example. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use Tabular Editor instead to accomplish that goal of coming back in here and changing any time that I've used that sum of sales revenue in a measure, and specifically these 4 here. I want to change that to just be sales, which is already an existing measure. All right, so I'm going to come back here to Tabular Editor. Now, why it's called Tabular Editor is really the actual underlying model that Power BI uses. When you're doing modifying a data set here in Power BI Desktop, you're actually modifying what's called a tabular model. And tabular models can actually live outside of Power BI as well. So you've heard of cubes, and there's SQL Server analysis services. All these things are actually, the more recent versions of, are actually also just tabular models, same exact code. It's that Power Query for development, and then it kind of takes DAX as its language for measures. So the tabular editor could be used to modify a tabular model that lives outside Power BI, but it also can be used to modify Power BI data sets by connecting to them. So when I come in to the tabular editor, one of the options I have here is to open from an existing database. When I come here, I could go to a server. That's what I was saying. I could have a tabular model sitting on a server somewhere, and I could connect by putting the server name in, or this local instance dropdown should, for any Power BI desktop file I currently have open on my machine, which in this case I have this dyad final. It actually, if you look, see it gives a little port number, and it's actually, quote unquote, a cube running on my machine, and I'm just connecting to it, right? So you can connect using this local instance dropdown. As soon as any data set you have open is going to show up in the list, and pick the right one. Okay, as soon as I do that, I get the little warning again. All right, and so now I kind of have a similar or slightly different tree view into everything about this actual data set. So you'll see some familiar stuff, right? I've got my relationships. Now they're just laid out as sort of items in a list. There's no sort of graphical GUI for it that shows your data, your relationships using the data models. But they're there. The information's there. If you did have RLS set up, it would show the roles. Here's some of these expressions that are the reason that they're even showing up, because they're basically parameters. So not every Power Query is going to show up here, but because they're shared, that these are being used or will display in the tabular editor. And really the guts of everything, right, are your tables. These are your queries that you've developed in your data model. So if I come here, I see my sales. Okay, let's say, so I've got this stuff here is connected. Let's say I wanted to basically, let's say I wanted to hide these guys, right? So let's say I took this and I want to hide these. Well, now I can multi-select and I can set this to true. So you start to see that I can do one action across multiple things. Now, some of this stuff, for example, what I just did there, has sort of started to become possible in the desktop. I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but if you have a recent enough, probably the last 5 or 6 months, maybe, of Power BI desktop, if you come to what's, it's kind of weird, but if you come to the model view, you'll see that you can actually multiple select things here. And some of the things that you can do, like changing it to hidden, changing the format, adding the 1000 separator, some of the stuff you can do is allowed for you to do across various measures or columns. So that's great. But that wasn't even available though until recently. So I'm sure some of you have experienced that as well, where I had to come to each one if I want to, change it to have the 1000 separator and have 2 places after the decimal point. I got to click on each one, make the change, wait for it to go, to say waiting for you, or waiting on it, or working on it, I should say. And then the next and the next and the next. Now you can kind of do some of that here even in Power BI, but the tabular editor is even kind of a little faster at it. So just to give you some flavor for what you can do there. But one of the things that I want to do here, right, is I want to actually come in here and change those measures, the expressions. So if I click on any one of these, I can see the expression. I want to change this sum sales revenue. Now, again, I could manually do it, and it would be a little faster because it's just going to accept my entry, right? It's going to immediately accept my entry, and it doesn't make me wait. I can click on my next measure if I want, right? So that's good, that's faster. But I can actually do what's also called scripting. So let me put this back here. All right. So there's this advanced scripting, and it's a little hard to get used to at first because you can only have one open at a time. But if I open here, I'm going to just open an existing C# file that I've created. So what it is it's C# code, but it's basically just code around maintaining the tabular model. There's basically a C# set of libraries that let me talk to the model and make changes to it. So I'm going to do this guy first here, to search and replace. So one of the things I can do is I can actually interrogate the model right? So you'll see here I got for each var t in the tables. So I'm actually going and looping through the tables of the model, and I'm going to do something, to each of the tables. So in this case, I've tried a bunch of things, right? I've said, oh, look, I can change the name of the table. I can go through and change names of columns of the table if I want. I can change the expression of a measure, or I could change the name of a measure. Those are sort of 4 things, but you'll see I have these commented out because it didn't go so well, right? So don't try to change the names of your tables here. I couldn't, it breaks for me. It ultimately, it looks like it'll work, but it doesn't work. So be careful about what you do. Maybe, every once in a while, if you're doing the scripting thing, kind of try it, see if it works. If not, you might want to step back a little bit. But one of the things you can definitely do is modify the expressions and the names of measures. In this case, I don't want to change the names of the measures, but I do want to go and search and replace, right? For this calculate sum of revenue, I want to just make it say calculate sales instead. And the reason I'm including the calculate in the check here is because sum of sales revenue is not enough. That would actually change it in the formula for the sales measure itself. So this is making sure that I don't change it too much either. But with a little coding here, and you can find examples of this, they're starting to become more available. There's a guy out there, Matt Allington, I'm sure many of you've heard of. What you're seeing here is sort of inspired by some things that Matt has out there. But anyway, so long story short, I'm going to come here and I'm going to run this guy. So again, the idea here is pretty basic. I'm looking for this string, calculate sum of sales revenue, and I'm changing it to calculate sales. It's going to loop through all the tables in the model, and it's going to loop through all the measures, and it's going to replace anytime it sees one with the other. Okay, so I'm going to run this script and kind of pay attention over here. Actually, let me do this first. All right, pay attention over here as I run. So I'm going to run. Okay, and you see these little question marks. So that tells me that something about these have changed. What I have not actually made any change to the model yet, right? So the model here, the data set, the Power BI file is still sitting here happy to have calculate of sum of sales revenue as its formula for those measures. But what I can do is there's sort of this little save. You'll see it's like a disk to save, but it's also a little box basically saying save it to the connected database. So as soon as I do that, it writes that back. And if I come here, I do get my one little working on it, but at least it's a fast one and it's its own thing. And look, boom, this sales, right, popped in. So I'm affecting a bunch of changes here at once, and then I'm saving them back all at one go. And I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit fast, but this is the kind of stuff you can do here. And so another thing I can do is there's this model.tables. I could actually just say selected. So if for some reason, let's say I had that sum of sales revenue in, my geography or my manufacturer table, I had some other measures. I don't want those to change. I can just select here the one table. And then if it's selected.tables, it'll only run this for each table, right? In this case, it's going to be the one that I have selected here, and I can run that. So that's another little trick there. All right, and so now I've got my formula correct. Everything looks good. It didn't bomb anything, right? My measures still work. If I click into any one of these, I'm seeing it changed. Everything's good to go. All right, so now let's say I wanted to actually change the names. Something that I did here was, it's a little bit more complex, but just to show you what you can do here, let me bring this down here a little bit. See if I can make this bigger. There we go. All right, coded up a little thing here, which basically goes through each of the tables. And what it does is it looks for anything where the measure starts with the term sales for. And what it first does is delete that measure, and then it recreates the measure with a new name. Same expression, right? All I'm doing is renaming them. And the trick is to delete them first and then rename them. Now, you might try the rename. You basically just say name equals, whatever the new value is. But sometimes I've experienced where that actually has a problem when I save that back. Seems to work much better if I first delete those measures and then re-add them. And you'll notice here I can actually set some properties of the measure at the same time. So what I've done here is I've set the format string, I can set the hidden, I can set pretty much any of these properties also through code as well as I'm creating these measures, right? So what this is going to do is it's just going to go loop through, and because I have it in selected.tables and I select the sales table, it's only going to run this against that one table, and it's going to find anything that's sales for something and rename it to the category name, which is the mix, rural, urban, or youth, dash sales. Okay, so you'll watch over here as I run. And they moved around because of alphabetically they changed, but there you go. You got your mixed sales, your rural sales, your urban sales, and your youth sales. And now I'm going to save this back. Okay. And it worked, right? Looks okay. However, wah, right? Well, unfortunately, the Power BI file, the Power BI desktop, it doesn't know. And this happens when you change names, when you do certain things inside Power BI desktop as well at times, where it doesn't understand, it thinks it still wants to use, or if I look at these details, it still wants to use the visual, a sales for urban, sales for rural, sales for youth, sales for mix measure. So when you look here in the actual visualization, you see which things are screwy, right? So there's a little bit of work there to be done. We're going to have to go through your report. And unfortunately, yes, if you have a lot of reports, there might be quite a bit of work there. But at the very least, you've at least swept through and figured out the things that you're going to have to fix, because it becomes pretty obvious what you have to fix. And so what I've done here is I've actually just created another table. So here we go. Now I've got my urban, rural, youth mix, and the names of the measures have changed. Again, just another example of where you can start to be creative with the scripting. There's a whole lot more you can do. The documentation is a little bit, again, because it's kind of a new thing, a new tool, but if you kind of poke around, try out some things, if you're, a C# developer or want to get a little crazier than what you can do in Power BI desktop, this could actually be used quite a bit to do those sort of mass operations on things. And just one last thing I'll do real quick, pretty much the same exact thing, but in reverse. So my version 2 here, what it does is it looks for anything that has dash sales in it, right? And it moves the category back to the end with sales for, right? So basically you're flipping the script and turning them back into sales for category. So I'll run that guy. Here you go. They move back to sales for, did the save. Come back here. Now, of course, this table is going to bomb, but my original table will work. All right. And so that's just to give you a couple quick tips and tricks with Tabular Editor. You find you can't, what you're not going to see here is you're not modifying the Power Query, right? You're not modifying the actual queries that make up the original data set. You can only modify the end result, the tables, the columns, the measures, and the relationships. So the part you see here in the desktop, not the part you see when you do the transform data. That is not part of what the Tabular Editor is used for. And the same thing, you'll find some of these similar kinds of concepts with DAX Studio. DAX Studio, just to give you a quick little blurb on that, is less around this sort of mass update kind of thing, and more around, running queries, checking performance of queries. Kind of gives you more of a different way to actually access the underlying data set, other than just creating visuals in the desktop. But there is some of these similar types of features. Definitely the scripting language is the one thing that's very, very unique to the Tabular Editor, and they continue to work on it. It's open source, so you can always download the latest free. And I'll take any questions, but other than that, that's pretty much it. Yeah. Hope that gave you a little flavor of Tabular Editor. Go, James.
Yeah. So, Bill, my first question, other than how long have you known about this, and did you let me change all of those measures?
Yes, I purposely let you change them.
Yeah. But no, my actual question is, so you were changing the measures, and you answered my first question, which is like, what happens to your reports? Obviously, they break. But so what if you have measures being used by measures, and you change the measures that are referenced? Is this smart enough to update the measures that reference them, or do you have to do those in the script as well?
Yeah, it's just like with desktop, right? So if you go and change something that's going to affect another measure, it will make that change for you. And honestly, you see this down here, changing the name can break formula logic if automatic formula fix up is disabled. I noticed this. If you go into the preferences, there's this thing called automatic formula fix up. I don't know. I thought that was going to fix a couple of things I was doing, like me trying to rename tables, but it didn't fix that either. Yeah, no, it definitely, just like here, if I come here and I change this, right, and then there was another measure that was dependent upon it, it will go and change that other measure, right, the reference. It will do the same thing inside the tabular editor as well.
Nice.
And I think it's when this happens, when this is checked, but I haven't tested that. In other words, if you uncheck this, maybe that doesn't happen. I don't know. So good luck trying that. Last thing I would say too is I was trying this the other day, the relationships. I wasted all my time. I did this new relationship and I created a bunch of them and then I saved them back and it didn't work. So be careful, like don't go too far ahead thinking, oh, this is awesome. This is so much faster than, because I don't know if you've managed relationships in Power BI desktop, but it's terrible too, in terms of slow, very slow.
Well, can you edit relationships and delete them through here, or is it
I was
just the
able-
adding new?
I was able to edit. I think I like switched the column one time and it worked okay. But yeah, it's one of those, you're going to have a little bit of trial and error with some of this stuff, definitely save, save a copy
Often.
before you start. Yeah. And save often inside anytime you come back here after hitting that save and you say working on it, you now have a data set that is not saved. Right. So you got to make sure you come in here and actually hit save as well. So that you don't anything, you can get back to what it was before. I haven't ever, so far ended up in a situation where it was unrecoverable. But I definitely have come to a couple times where I wasted a lot of time because I thought it was going to be faster, but then when I hit save, it didn't work. So, again, it's sort of a little bit of a wild west with this tool, but where it does work, it works great.
So Bill, two things. You show connecting to the model that's deployed locally because you're running Power BI desktop. You can, in theory, connect through premium XML endpoints to something that's deployed to Power BI and publish changes directly there. Just
Yes.
be careful because if you republish again from Power BI desktop, you're not going to have those changes. So.
Yep, unless you purposely download that. Can you download that file after?
It depends if the feature that you applied is supported in Power BI desktop.
Oh, well, that's
Right.
true too. Of course.
Yeah.
Yep. That's true. Oh,
And
so
then,
you're saying like the calculation groups.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then the other thing just worth noting for people who, sometimes want to understand what's going on behind the scenes of Power BI, you have two extra kind of grayed out date tables there.
Yeah.
So if you've ever dragged a date field onto an axis and you see it creates the hierarchy for you, year, month, quarter, month, day. Power BI behind the scenes creates those kind of invisible tables that support that hierarchy. So you could actually see them there, even though they're invisible elsewhere.
This is the manual we created, but yeah, similar. Yep. And you can actually turn that off too.
Yep.
By default, you're right. Any date field you have, there's a hidden table for it. Not just a date table, but a date field.
Yep, and they can take up a lot of space too. So that's why it's usually best practice to create separate date tables and use those.
Right, but I think when you drag those date fields onto your visuals and it creates those additional tables, it improves performance of that particular use of that date hierarchy. So like if you have it turned off, it'll reduce the performance of that particular one, but it saves you some space. That's why I think what you're alluding to is it's better to just use everything driven from one date table.
With a couple exceptions, yeah.
Okay.
The other thing I'd say is with the roles, same thing as relationships. So I was able to modify a bunch of existing ones that I had, but I had to create the role first in the desktop file and let it sync over here. And then I could change because each role you can set on any table a filter for the row level security. So anytime you create a role, here, let me just do it real quick. So if I come in here and I say, So date, yeah. I don't know if that's going to work, but all right. So now I've got my, okay. I've got my role. Should, oop, there we go. Well, that's interesting. Did not like that role. Is that why? It usually keeps up pretty well, but my tabular editor is locked now. Let me try saving. Oh, that's why. That's why. Oh yeah, so that'll happen too. Is if you make a change in your desktop file while you have the tabular editor open, it's gonna warn. It's gonna, you know, kind of like Notepad does, right? It's gonna say, "Oh, a change was made. Do you want to update?" And then if you hit yes, then now it'll come in. Okay, so now here's my role. So I can come in here and change this one, but I can't come in here. I try, like if I hit new, blah, blah, blah. Let's see what happens. It's gonna make a liar out of me, isn't it? It may have been, yeah, it may have been because I not only did I create it empty, but I set values. You know, I went through the process of actually creating the entire role and then saved it, and it didn't like it. It required me to create the role first, and then after that, I could do any of the individual settings if I wanted to. So anyway, you know, play around. So and then you kind of learn, you know, which things work for you, which ones don't, kind of to stay away from. And definitely the little language here, you know, takes a little getting used to, but it's pretty sharp.
I've got a quick question for you, Bill.
Sure. Yeah.
If you were to modify something that exists like within the Power Query Editor, like say you have a calculated column that you made in M and not in X,
Right.
and you want to modify the values in there, you know, just add something simple, and you saved that back to the model, is that going to persist through once you reapply query changes from the Power Query Editor?
Yeah, it'll do that
okay.
same thing. It'll pop that little pop-up saying, oh, the model has changed. So if you added a column, let's say, you know, to the table. So if I actually came in here, I'm not going to do it, but if you came in here to the actual queries and added a column or changed a column, those changes are going to it's going to prompt me to say yes. Come on, here we go. You know, it's going to prompt me to say yes, but what the heck, I'm here, I might as well do it. Go basic. So now I've added a column row count to my sales table. That's not a good idea. Let me take that one out. I am going to add it to my manufacturer table instead, because I know that that's a small table. I don't want to take too long to refresh. Okay, come here, close and apply. Let it do its lovely working on it. Okay. And now if I come back here, should either just do it. There it is. I guess I don't know why it didn't ask me. Maybe because I answered once yes. I don't know. Kind of weird, because usually it does. If you make any change, it's going to ask you first, you know, but that row count now shows up here. So it tries to keep the two in sync, basically. The only thing it won't do is go the other way unless I specifically hit the save button. So anything else? Okay, well, hopefully it gives you a little inspiration to try it out, and let us know if you have questions as you're using it, or if you find that some part of it didn't work. Happy to hear those too. Back to you, Casey.
You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, so we're actually going to go to Graham now. So Graham, if you want to share your screen and show off some new feature updates.
Sure thing. Everyone see?
I can see.
Perfect. All right, so I'll talk a little quickly here. We're running a little bit short on time, but I'm just going to be going through the new features introduced in August and September. So starting off in August, we got a few reporting changes. The perspective support has been added for personalized visuals. So what this means is visuals can be personalized from an end user to display different metrics or different dimensions. Now, actually using that tabular editor, you can add perspectives, which essentially just limits the number of options available to those end users, so they don't have to look at a bunch of clutter. So that can be pretty useful if you are taking advantage of the personalized visuals feature. There was a rectangular lasso select added for data points in line charts and scatter plots and area charts. So that's pretty cool, and I will actually be showing off a quick demo of that after I go through the updates here. And there was a dynamic formatting support for more visuals for bar graphs, line graphs, and point plots. And what that means is, say you have a slicer that's going to be changing which value is displayed in a line chart. You can now dynamically format it so that, say one of your values is currency and the other one's a percentage, you can now have it formatted to show that percentage in the visual rather than just a number. Moving over to the analytics side, there's now direct query support for Q&A for SQL sources only. So now when you use the Q&A feature, it says, ask a question of your data. You can do that against live data. And the only change that's been made to the tooltip is there's a submit button. And the reason for that is they don't want to be running queries against your data for every letter that you enter. They only want you to make that query once you're done with your question. So yeah, direct support for Q&A. There were a number of visuals added, not out of the box, but available on the marketplace that they pointed out. I won't go through all of these because there are quite a few. One that I did try out that was pretty cool is the AdWise roadmap here, which was a really cool way to kind of outline a project plan or like a campaign, whatever you want. It's a good way to use your time data to kind of display things that will be happening over time and how they align. Into the data preparation section, you can now prep your text or CSV data by example. This is another preview feature, so something else you have to enable from the preview features pane. I'll also show where that is when I do my quick demo later. And finally, in the August update, there were some additional data connectors added. So they added a connector for 3 separate sources, the Sherwell connector, Automation Anywhere connector, and Actares connector. If there's no questions on this, I'll move on to the September updates.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Dave. So the updates to the ArcGIS maps, I noticed that I don't use ArcGIS maps very often, but I have used them in the past, and they work great for doing like heat maps. I recently tried using it, and it wasn't rendering the map, and I wasn't really getting any error messages. Do you think it could be that I'm not using, I guess, the most up-to-date version of Power BI, and this update might be messing that up?
I'd say it's possible. I think what they added was the ability to log into like an ArcGIS account through Power BI. I'm not sure how backwards compatible the update was. So I can't say for sure if that's an issue, but definitely a good thing to try to update to the most recent version and see if your issue with ArcGIS.
Okay, thanks.
I've encountered a few issues. Like one thing I noticed is all of a sudden the legend shows on top of the visual, and you could turn it off, but it's kind of annoying, if you had a map and all of a sudden now there's a legend covering half the side, half of it. And the other I noticed was I had reference layers in the past. So like I had like a Boston, map, and I used to have the neighborhood, so I could click on like Southie or something like that, and it would select all the points. But that ability to select the reference layer kind of behind the data stopped working. So there's a couple things going on with the ArcGIS map that are not quite as thoroughly tested as some of the backwards compatibility features for the Microsoft visuals. So yeah, I definitely have had some success and some not so great success with the updates there.
Mm-hmm. Well, any suggestions on any other map to use to do heat maps?
So Mapbox is one we use quite a bit. You have to register to get a developer code, but then it's free up to a pretty significant volume, I think, of use. You just have to put the code in so that they can kind of keep tabs on how much you're using it. But if I recall, it's a very high limit in terms of free use. But they have a couple cool features like as you zoom in, it can change from a heat map to a different type of layer, like a bubble chart or a bubble kind of map. They have like choropleth option, and you could kind of extrude the boundaries, so you could make them different heights based on another measure. So it's the Mapbox is probably one of the best ones out there. But each has its own benefits, so it's kind of a decision you have to go through each time you're using it.
Cool, thanks.
All right, cool. So moving on to the September updates. In September, they actually changed the layout of their blog. So they brought together all of the updates to Power BI Desktop with all of the updates to the Power BI Service and Power BI Mobile. So if you do follow the blog, and the links for the blog are in this spreadsheet, we could probably throw those in the chat as well. It now contains a lot more information. And you'll see some changes in here to the service down here. And there's a whole other section for mobile changes that I won't be getting into. But starting from the top, there were a few more reporting changes in this month's update. That data point rectangle select that I mentioned was made available for a few additional chart types. So any bar chart, column chart, or stacked chart, you can now use a rectangular select on to select multiple data points. Once again, the data point rectangle is a preview feature, so if you do want to take advantage of that, you will have to enable it. They added a general visual option to maintain the layer order. What that means is that you can now set a setting on any visual to make it always stay at the same layer in your report. This only affects the reading view of reports, so you're only ever going to see this impact your report when it's in the service and you're looking at it. But this is actually quite useful. There's a lot of cases where you might want to put a background image or a shape or something behind a visual. And in the past, if the user were to misclick or just click anywhere that wasn't a chart, this giant shape or background image would come up and cover the visual or maybe even the whole page, and was annoying to work around. With this, you can now lock it in the back and keep it out of the way. A third feature that was added here was actually one of their very highly requested features, another handy one. Now, when you're publishing a report, you can search for a workspace to publish to. If you've ever worked with having many workspaces and trying to publish a report, it's a real pain in the ass to scroll through every workspace available, check all the names, make sure the one you're selecting is the right name. it's just kind of a thorn in the side. Now you can just type in the name of your workspace, it'll show up. It's nice and easy. The fourth thing in the list here, they added a total labels for stacked visuals. So any stacked column, stacked bar chart that has data separated into multiple dimensions, now you can have an aggregated total show above the chart in addition to the detail labels. That's pretty handy. That's something that I always wondered why it wasn't a thing, and now it is. That's nice. But it basically mimics the behavior of a regular column or bar chart. Another thing that's cool with this is you can distinguish between positives and negatives in either a full aggregation, like we'll add all the numbers together and come up with the total, or you can split the positive and negative numbers so that you have an aggregate of your positive numbers and an aggregate of your negative numbers, which depending on your use case might be a better way to display your data. And then the last point here is a number of mobile authoring enhancements. Once again, I'm going to avoid getting into the mobile stuff, but I think they removed grids and a few other things. For the analytics, there's a new preview feature of smart narratives. So there's kind of two use cases for this. You can now select a visual and right-click and click Summarize, and Power BI will do its best to basically provide you what the QA feature would on that visual, and write out kind of in plain English the key points of the visual, what's important to look at, anything interesting about it. I tried it out a bit, and that's actually part of the quick demo I'll give after this. But it seems pretty cool. It's not always incredibly useful. Of course, it depends on your data set, but it's a fun way to kind of dive into your data and see what Power BI can find about it. The other way that you can use smart narratives is actually apply it to an entire report page. So if you click on the new visual option, smart narratives, and you drag it into your page, it will try to summarize everything on the page for you. This is one that I played around with briefly, and I think it's really hard to get the results that you want using that kind of visual, but it's a cool idea. And another thing that you can just kind of play around with. In addition to that, in terms of analytics, the QA feature now supports arithmetic operations. What that means is when you're, when the dialog comes up, ask a question of your data, you can now, rather than just inputting like a specific value from a table, you can put a parenthesis and have that value plus another value minus another value, really tailor your questions. I don't really use the QA feature that much, but it's cool to have that little extra control over the question you're asking of your data. So moving into the service, again, this is a new section to our monthly updates, but there were a number of service changes this month. There are a few new capabilities when looking at the lineage view of a data model. You can search within the lineage to find names, and it will just highlight those names for you, make it nice and easy to find them. And there's a data source impact analysis. That's not really something I was able to explore, but certainly a useful feature. Also in the service, Excel will inherit Power BI's dataset sensitivity when using a pivot table connection. So if you ever analyze a data set in Excel or connect to Excel connect to Power BI from Excel, the sensitivity of your data will be transferred over. To go along with that, the Analyze in Excel from the service now provides you with an Excel file rather than an ODC file, so a little bit smoother. And finally, the deployment pipelines is now generally available. I think that's something that we touched on earlier in the presentation. Casey was talking a little bit about the deployment. Deployment pipelines, taking a little bit of a step back, is a really cool feature that I think is, Power BI has never had source control, but I think deployment pipelines is an amazing step in the right direction. I think it's really cool to see that. Next, moving into modeling. Enhanced dataset metadata is now generally available. So just taking a look at a dataset and seeing the metadata about it, you know, how big it is, the privacy settings, stuff like that. And there were performance improvements to aggregation expressions involving columns of currency data. Not a huge update, but nice thing. Next is visualizations that were added. So once again, none of these are out of the box visualizations. These are visualizations that are available to import. But we have a few here. There's a collage, advanced trellis, and a waterfall chart. I checked out a few of them, and some of them are more artsy, but I liked the waterfall chart. They also added a section though in the import visuals into Power BI for editors picks, which is a cool idea where every month they're going to have somebody at Microsoft go through visuals and pick out kind of some of their favorites, and those are going to be available to you to see in the editors picks section. Moving on.
Hey, Graham, just real quick, going back to the enhanced dataset metadata. One thing to note with that is that's a feature that's going to be a default going forward. Right now, you have to turn it on, I believe, in most cases, but that unlocks a whole bunch of new capabilities in Power BI. So things that you couldn't do in the past with this feature are now available. I don't know if the Tabular Editor connectivity is one of them, but there's a lot of things that it's going to unlock in the future too. Graham mentioned how Power BI has always not been fantastic in terms of source control integration. This new and metadata format, like how it's actually saving the model behind the scenes, is going to allow that. You know, because it's going to save tables separately, so you don't. Eventually, you'll get to the point where you don't have to check in the whole PBIX file. You'll be able to, you know, check in like the model itself, so you could see what was changed. Like someone, you know, modified the structure of this table, as opposed to just saying, you know, the whole PBIX itself changed. So that's something to kind of keep an eye on, because if something's not working the way you might expect, that might be part of the reason you might have to turn that on.
Great, thanks, Jared. So one thing that I actually forgot to mention, thanks for bringing me back, is in terms of the service, you can now select for your organization visuals that you want to be available and look out of the box. So normally in a Power BI report, your visuals are going to look like this, right? Everybody's familiar with this box of visuals. And then if you have imported visuals, they're going to show up below here. You can now have an admin set certain visuals that you've bought or downloaded as out of the box visuals. And anytime anybody in the organization opens up a report, those visuals can be in this box and just behave like of an out of the box visualization. So another cool change for source control. Sorry, going back here. So to finish up the list for September, 4 more data connectors were added: a CDS connector, Azure Databricks, which is a pretty exciting one to see, MariaDB, and Hexagon PPM Smart API connector. Next up, in the template apps, a few template apps were added, and essentially what these are just pre-made dashboards that you just have to load your data into and not think as much about the visualizations you're putting on the page. You just kind of provide it with your data, and it's already formatted. You already got your visuals there. Definitely a handy feature if you don't want to put much time into development. Perhaps not as useful for those that want to develop a custom dashboard. And finally, to finish it off, there was a new community forum supporting the Spanish language created, and a theme was added to Data Stores Gallery. So that's it for the September updates. Any questions or points on these? All right, great. So I will just go through a quick demo here. I know we're like almost out of time and we do want to have some time at the end, so I'll keep this nice and short. But I wanted to show off a few of the features that I thought were cool. So what I have here is just some data that I've imported from a weather site. It's very simple data, just a few columns, and it's just going to have average precipitation, average low temperature, and average high temperature monthly readings from the cities of Glastonbury and Boston. So I just threw in a few simple visuals, and the first thing that I wanted to show off was the rectangular select. So by holding Control, I can create this box on my visual, and when I let go, it's going to select all of the data points that fall within that box. And you can see immediately that it is in fact selecting them. We saw our average low temperature increase and a few of the other visuals change. So a really good way to kind of quickly grab the data you want. You don't have to hold down Control and individually click on each of these anymore. You can select it much easier. But in addition to that, you can continue selecting. If you hold Shift, you can, all right, button. Control Shift. Okay, I thought it was Shift plus drag. Maybe I got the wrong key combination here.
You might have been a little bit too high. You might have been off the graph region in the legend. I wonder if that's why.
Oh, that's probably it. I am on a trackpad, so I have to like, it's not easy. Anyways, holding Shift is kind of an additive select. So normally if you hold Control and click and drag, and then I'm holding Control, I'll do it again, it's going to deselect what I already have selected and treat this like a brand new selection. But holding Shift down is going to add the data points that you select. So just a little bit of extra control as you're trying to select your data. And I just wanted to show one more example of kind of a cool use case for this. In this graph on the bottom, so you have selected only points from Boston. It's going to zoom in on Boston for me and show me the average precipitation over those months. So the second thing that I wanted to talk about is that new preview feature for Smart Narrative. So this is the visualization option that you can click to add to your report. And this is the one that's going to try to explain everything on the page for you. So this is the one that I said a little bit hard to use. It's kind of going to throw a lot of information at you, and some of it might not make much sense. Nice to know it's there though. It'll tell you things like July accounted for 22.5% of average low temperature in degrees Fahrenheit. Of course, that's not really how we think about temperature. It's not really an additive measurement, so that's not super useful. But if we were looking at the right data set, maybe that would make more sense.
Does that update when you make selections or no?
No, it does not.
It's just like a one-time drag and.
Well, actually, I may be incorrect on that.
Huh. Yeah, it changed.
It did change. That's actually pretty cool. It makes it even harder to use, I think. But you know, that's actually quite cool that we have an interactive summary of the data that's selected on the screen.
Yeah.
And,
S-
and that's a preview feature, right? So they'll have to enable
Yeah.
that in desktop.
Yeah, I was going to show off how to enable both of those right
Oh.
after this.
Sorry.
No problem. Yeah, the other use case, the one that I said is a little bit easier to use, is looking at only a single visual. So if you select a visual and left click on it and hit this summarize button, it's going to create that same visual that we saw before, but only for the data in this graph. And when this loads, now we can see data that actually makes a little bit more sense. The average high for Glastonbury and Boston both trended downward between Wednesday, 1st of July, and Tuesday, 1st of December. And other data points that make sense when we're just looking at a graph of temperature over time. It also says that Glastonbury is more interesting than Boston, so I'm going to go ahead and delete this.
So
being the only Bostonite on the call, I can't let that stay.
Did that create the visual for you, or can you like throw that somewhere on a page so like it's populated when you right click and do the smart narrative? So like right now you don't have the narrative on the visual. It creates the visual for you?
Yes, it does. And it actually throws it into the spot that it finds most appropriate. So if I were to move this over here, it's now going to create the visual on the left side.
So is there a way to like, I don't know, I was thinking like strategically place it like in somewhere and then view narrative and get it to show and hide, or no?
Not that I know of. I didn't have too much time to play around with it.
Yeah, it's all good. I was just curious. I definitely want to play. I think this is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is certainly a lot of potential. It's a really cool feature. It's just, I think it might be a little bit difficult to find a use case for it. So last thing is just how to get these new features, and any new features that were labeled with the little preview in parentheses. These are all preview features within Power BI. So to enable them in a report, we have to go to File, into Options and Settings, to the Options button. Once that comes up, down here on the global list near the bottom is the preview features. We can see these are a lot of the preview features that I mentioned, going over that list, as well as a few extra ones. And it's really easy to just select which ones you want to preview. Just be aware that they are in preview. They're not out of the box, so there could still be bugs with them. But it's really easy to just select them, click OK. And many of them require you to restart your desktop application to work. But that's how you get there if you ever want to enable any of these cool features. So that's pretty much all I have in the updates from September and August. Anyone have any questions?
All right. So I will close this out here. Nice job, Graham. Those some cool updates definitely in that list. Thanks for sharing.
No problem, Casey.
All right. So just to go over some user group business. Again, our meeting frequency is every other month. So definitely thank you all for coming. Hope you learned something as well. Hope to see you, in the next 2 months. If anybody wants to participate, whether it be producing content, sponsorship, just even if it's something like going over the monthly updates, to allow you to present at the user group and demonstrate some of the features yourself, definitely just reach out, whether it be on the meetup or the user group itself. You could reach out to me directly as well if needed. But if there's any interest there for demonstrating something, definitely let us know, as well as a business case or problem that you may have that we can discuss on our next meeting. So yeah, that brings us into future events. If along with that, if you have any content that would be of interest for you for next time, whether it be Power BI Embedded, it seems like the Esri maps may be of interest. Anything on this list or something that's not on this list, again, just let us know, whether it be here or on any of the forums. So with that, I think we all set. Are there any questions, anything to bring up? Other than that, Gina, you got something?
Oh no, I did not.
Oh.
Did I raise my hand?
No. All right. In that case, yeah, hope you all had a